My daughter-in-law was always polite in front of everyone. She never raised her voice, and she never needed to say anything cruel. But with her cold smile, her unspoken rules, and the way she controlled every corner of the house, she slowly made me realize in my son's family I was nothing more than a burden waiting to be sent away. The scuffed brown faux leather suitcase was everything I had to show for my life as I left rural Ohio behind for New York. After 30 years of widowhood, my entire world had been shrunk down and poured into raising Julian. But lately, my arthritis had become brutal, and when the doctor warned me that living alone in the countryside was no longer safe, Julian insisted I move in with him. Standing in the middle of the chaotic, echoing cavern of Penn Station, I felt incredibly small, my hand trembling as I gripped my son's arm. He smiled down at me, but his eyes kept darting back to the buzzing screen of his phone. Standing just a step behind him was Meredith. She wore a tailored charcoal wool coat without a single wrinkle, her hair swept up into a flawless, severe bun. She didn't offer a hug. Instead, she extended a hand polite, but perfectly measured to maintain a distinct boundary. "Welcome to New York, Eleanor," she said. "Traffic heading out of the city is pretty brutal today, on the drive." I tried to break the ice by chatting about the upcoming harvest back home, but Meredith's attention remained fixed on her tablet, her fingers clicking rapidly across the screen. Their house in the suburbs of Long Island was stunning, but it was suffocatingly minimalist. There were no handmade lace runners, no lingering scent of baking vanilla. Everything was sterile, polished, and cold. Meredith led me up to the second-floor guest room. It was stark, just a bed, a dresser, and a small vase of dried lavender. "Get some rest," Meredith set her hand on the doorknob. "I've already programmed the smart thermostat for your room." She closed the door quietly behind her. I sat on the edge of the mattress, watching the shadows stretch across the unfamiliar walls as darkness fell. I felt exactly like a piece of bulky, outdated furniture that had been shoved into a sleek, ultra-modern showroom where it didn't belong. I woke up at 5 in the morning. Decades of farm life forge a biological clock that doesn't care about a change of address. The house was dead silent. Stepping quietly down into the kitchen, I decided to whip up a batch of the blueberry pancakes Julian used to obsess over when he was a boy. I just wanted to infuse a little warmth, a little flavor of home into this icy house. The soft clinking of bowls and whisks echoed through the silence. By 6:30, Meredith appeared at the bottom of the stairs in her athletic wear. She froze in the doorway, looking at the battlefield of flour dusted across her pristine quartz countertops and catching the heavy scent of melting butter. Her brows knit into a tight line. "Eleanor, what's going on in here?" she asked, her voice flat and even, yet freezing. "I'm making breakfast for everyone," I said, beaming, hoping to break through her chill. But Meredith didn't even glance at the plate I had poured my heart into. She walked straight past me to the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of green juice. "Eleanor, Julian, and I follow a pretty strict meal plan," she said. "Refined flour and sugar aren't a part of our routine. Beyond that, I like to manage the kitchen schedule myself." Julian walked in right then. Sensing the thick tension, he quickly grabbed a pancake and took a huge bite to smooth things over. "These are amazing, Mom," he mumbled. Meredith immediately turned to him. "Did you forget we have that 8 o'clock client presentation? Eating a heavy carb load like that is just going to make you sluggish." I stood there frozen in the center of the kitchen, still clutching the spatula. My chest tightened. Back home breakfast was a sacred time for family to gather, a mother's way of showing love. Here, my affection was nothing more than an annoying disruption to Meredith's carefully calibrated schedule. The silent Cold War escalated as I desperately tried to find a purpose, any purpose in the house. I couldn't bear to sit idly while the two of them rushed around. Seeing a load of laundry sitting in the washer, I took it out and hung it up to dry. Finding their bedroom a bit untidy, I went in, straightened up, and neatly tucked in the sheets. That evening, the moment she got home, Meredith marched straight into the living room where I was watching television. Her face was a mask of tightly controlled fury. "Eleanor, we need to talk." She set down a laundry basket with a sharp thud. "I appreciate that you're trying to help out, but our bedroom is a private space. I don't want anyone, including family, going in there without asking. On top of that, these blouses are dry clean only. Putting them through a standard cycle completely ruins the fabric." My face burned with humiliation and defensive pride. "I was just trying to take some weight off your shoulders after a long day. I'm Julian's mother. Is there really a single thing in this house that needs to be hidden from me? This is our home, Eleanor," Meredith said, her voice dropping into a firm, deliberate cadence. "And we value our boundaries. I need my privacy." That night, I sobbed into my pillow, muffled sobs racking my body. I called my oldest friend back in Ohio, my voice cracking. "She treats me like a total stranger, Sarah, like an intruder. I raised my son for 30 years, and now I don't even have the right to touch his clothes." Meredith's words felt like a scalpel slicing a clean, cold line between me and my son's new life. My son was caught in an impossible vice. On one side was his widowed mother, who had sacrificed her youth to give him a future. On the other was his brilliant, independent wife, whom he deeply respected. By dinner, the atmosphere had become so suffocating that the only sound was the scraping of silverware against porcelain. "Julian, we should hit the grocery store this weekend to pick up a few things for my room," I suggested, trying to shatter the silence. "We have that golf outing with the senior partners this weekend." "Julian," Meredith interrupted smoothly, her eyes never leaving her salad. I dropped my fork, the hurt boiling over. "Work, work, always work. Julian, can't you spare just one day for your mother?" Julian let out a heavy sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Mom, Meredith is right. This is a massive account for the firm. I'll make it up to you next week, I promise." Meredith looked across the table at me, her tone practical, unyielding, and utterly detached. "Eleanor, Julian is a grown man with a demanding career and a family of his own to take care of now. You can't expect to hold on to him the way you did back in Ohio." That cut right to my deepest, rawest nerve. In that moment, I convinced myself she was intentionally trying to sever the maternal bond, trying to erase my footprint from Julian's life. To me, Meredith wasn't just a difficult daughter-in-law anymore. She was a cold-hearted villain, systematically stealing the only anchor I had left in the world. The pot finally boiled over on a Tuesday afternoon. Meredith came home early because of a blinding migraine. She walked into the den and caught me digging through the neat stacks of paperwork on her desk, searching for a pen. "What are you doing?" she snapped, losing her composure for the very first time. "I was just looking for a pen," I stammered, my heart jumping into my throat. "Those are corporate tax returns and non-disclosure agreements," Meredith yelled, snatching the folders out of my hands, her chest heaving. "I have asked you repeatedly to respect my workspace. Do you have any concept of personal boundaries at all?" Deeply wounded tears stung my eyes. "You're accusing me of disrespect. I am your mother-in-law. I have swallowed my pride every single day since I arrived. You are cold. You are selfish. And you don't have a single drop of family decency in you." Right then, the front door clicked open. Julian walked into the house, stepping right into the crossfire, looking completely overwhelmed. Meredith turned to him, her voice trembling but resolute. "Julian, I can't live like this anymore. This constant invasion of privacy is destroying my peace of mind and fracturing our marriage. We need a real solution. I think it's time we look into one of those high-end assisted living communities nearby. I felt the blood drain from my face. Assisted living. To an old-school mother like me, those words sounded like abandonment. It felt like the ultimate act of cruelty, a calculated move by my daughter-in-law to force my son to cast me aside. Julian apologized profusely and begged me to go up to my room so he could talk to Meredith alone. That night, the house was wrapped in an ominous, heavy quiet. Sleep was out of the question. The thought of being exiled to a facility left to wither away among strangers made my chest ache with a physical pain. Past midnight, I decided to slip downstairs to get a glass of warm water to calm my nerves. As I passed Meredith's home office, a sliver of warm light cut through the cracked door. I went to take another step, but the sound of Meredith's voice made my feet glue themselves to the hardwood floor. She was on a FaceTime call with her mother out in California. I shrank back into the shadows of the hallway, my heart pounding with resentment, fully expecting to hear her tearing me apart to find sympathy. "Mom, I am just so exhausted," Meredith whispered. Her voice was cracked, completely stripped of that polished Teflon exterior. "I know how much Eleanor sacrificed to raise Julian by herself. But every time she forces herself to do all the chores, the cooking, the cleaning, I'm overwhelmed with guilt. I feel like a total failure in my own home. It's like she won't even give me the space to take care of my husband in my own way." I froze. I pressed my palm against the hallway wall, barely breathing, listening intently. Inside the room, Meredith reached up to wipe a stray tear from her cheek. It was the first time I had ever seen her cry. I remained hidden in the darkness, captivated by the raw honesty coming through the doorway. Her mother murmured something comforting on the other end, and Meredith let out a long, ragged sigh. "I don't hate her, Mom. I don't. I just want her to rest," Meredith confessed, her voice thick with emotion. For 30 years, her entire identity has been Julian's mom. She doesn't have hobbies, she doesn't have friends, she has no life of her own. I want her to travel to join a senior center to finally live for herself before it's too late. But every time I try to tell her to stop working around the house, she thinks I'm trying to exile her. Meredith sniffled, trying to compose herself. "I suggested that retirement community because it's beautiful. They have on-site physical therapy for her arthritis, and there are people her own age to socialize with. I want her to have an actual, vibrant life, not just pace around my kitchen collecting anxiety." But I don't know how to say it without it sounding wrong. My delivery is always so clinical. I know I hurt her. I stood paralyzed in the dark corridor. Every word out of her mouth felt like a lightning bolt shattering the thick fog of my own assumptions. My daughter-in-law wasn't a heartless monster. She was just a woman raised in a completely different world. One where love is shown by giving someone independence and space, not by hovering and sacrificing until there's nothing left of yourself. I crept back up to my bedroom, but this time, the tears that came weren't from self-pity. They were tears of sudden, sharp clarity. I walked over to the vanity mirror and looked at myself. The woman looking back had snow-white hair and deep, permanent lines carved by decades of labor and worry. I asked myself the hardest question of my life. Since the day my husband died, have I ever done a single thing just for me? The truth was devastating. No. I had turned my son into my singular reason for existing. And when he built a life of his own, I took that entire suffocating weight of motherly love and dumped it onto his new marriage, turning my acts of service into an invisible cage that was choking his wife. I finally understood that Meredith wasn't wrong for protecting her space. A young marriage needs room to breathe and grow. My stubborn interference was only stalling them and making me miserable in the process. I already finished raising him. I thought to myself, sacrifice shouldn't become a chain that locks 2 generations into resentment. It was time for me to learn a lesson I had never been taught back in Ohio: the grace of letting go and the courage to love myself. The next morning, the tension at the breakfast table was thick enough to cut with a knife. Julian sat staring into his coffee, his face pale and exhausted from a sleepless night, while Meredith quietly prepped her mug, steeling herself for a brutal conversation that neither of them knew how to begin. I walked downstairs dressed neatly in a casual blouse and slacks. I didn't touch the stove. Instead, I pulled out a chair and sat directly across from them. Julian, Meredith, we need to talk. I began, my voice steady and calm. Julian instantly grabbed my hand, panic in his eyes. Mom, about yesterday. I smiled softly and gently patted his hand to silence him. Then I turned and looked Meredith straight in the eyes. Meredith, I've been thinking about your suggestion. I think it's a wonderful idea. I'd like to take a look at that senior living community down the road. Both of their mouths fell open. Meredith stared at me, a wave of confusion, relief, and deep regret washing over her face. Eleanor, please know I never wanted to throw you out. I know that now, I said, ensuring every ounce of warmth I felt came through my voice. I've spent 30 years being a mother, and somewhere along the line, I forgot how to just be Eleanor. I think it's time I make some friends my own age and get some proper care for these hips. You were right, Meredith. You two need your own space, and I deserve to have a life of my own too. In an instant, the invisible anvil that had been hanging over the household for months simply vanished. A month later, I officially moved into my new apartment. It was beautiful, boasting a community garden, an expansive library, and weekly watercolor classes. Thanks to the daily physical therapy sessions, my mobility improved drastically. The day I moved out, there was no air of smug victory around Meredith. In fact, she was the one who meticulously packed my fragile items in bubble wrap. Before I got into the car, she walked up to me and handed me a small, beautifully wrapped box with a red bow. Inside was a shiny new key to their front door, alongside a small leather journal written in her precise, elegant handwriting. She had listed all the local emergency numbers, the best physical therapists, and a curated list of the finest traditional American diners in my new neighborhood. Eleanor, this is the key to our house, Meredith said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You come over whenever you want, but when you do, you are our honored guest, not our housekeeper. I pulled Meredith into a tight embrace, our very first real hug in the 2 months we had lived under the same roof. I hope anyone who hears my story realizes something vital. Boundaries aren't built to keep people out. They are designed to preserve the respect that keeps relationships alive. And sometimes the greatest act of love a parent can offer isn't endless sacrifice, but the willingness to let your children fly so you can finally learn to stand on your own 2 feet again.